The day the empath disappears is never what people imagine. There is no slammed door, no dramatic goodbye, no emotional storm exploding into the air. That moment arrives quietly, so quiet that if you don't listen with your soul, you'll miss it entirely. The empath doesn't disappear because they are weak. They disappear because they have finally become strong enough to stop. Strong enough to stop trading their heart for places that never knew how to hold it. And that disappearance, the silent withdrawal of their energy, is the narcissist's worst nightmare. Because the narcissist doesn't fear losing you. They fear losing their reflection in you. They live off the light you emit, the understanding you carry, the unconditional softness you give without ever asking for anything in return. When the empath goes silent, it is not just a person who leaves. An entire inner universe that once nourished the narcissist's fragile ego collapses with them. But to understand why that silence holds such destructive power, we must look deeper into the nature of the empath. They are souls with a heightened sensitivity, able to sense even what is left unsaid. They can read the wound behind the anger, the fear behind the control, the loneliness hidden under pride. Precisely because they see so much, they love deeply, forgive quickly, and always believe kindness can save everything. They ignite light to guide others, even when their own energy has been running on empty for a long time. Yet no one sees the price of that light. No one sees the silent tears, the private questions whether they deserve to be loved the way they love others. No one sees the exhaustion of a soul that must constantly be the strong one for people who only know how to take. And then, one day, not out of anger, not out of disappointment, but because the soul simply cannot carry it any longer, they disappear. That disappearance is not an escape. It is a quiet declaration. I choose myself. It is the day the empath steps into their own darkness, not to hide, but to be reborn. An inner initiation, Jung called the beginning of individuation. The moment a person stops living to please others and begins living to become who they truly are. And from this point on, a terrifying truth emerges. The narcissist is no longer facing the old empath. They are now confronted with the reborn version, still gentle but no longer fragile, still loving deeply but no longer losing themselves, still able to feel others' pain but no longer a refuge for those who refuse responsibility. This is what truly terrifies the narcissist. The empath does not return to serve them. They return to resurrect themselves, a version the narcissist no longer has the right to touch. And that is the day the balance of power shifts. In silence. When an empath begins to withdraw their energy, no one sees a sudden shift. There is no abrupt coldness, no hostility, no punishing distance. Everything unfolds like a natural process, the way the sun sets. No one knows the exact second. They only notice the light is no longer as bright as before. This withdrawal is not a strategy. It is a subtle survival reflex of the soul. When it has given too much, the body finds a way to keep something for itself. You'll see them smile less but not be sad, speak less but not be distant, share less but not be cold. They do not disappear. They simply shrink to the size of the respect they receive. An empath withdraws not because they have stopped loving, but because they suddenly realize they have been standing alone. In relationships that were supposed to have two people, they realize they were the one keeping the conversation alive, the one soothing the atmosphere, the one noticing every emotional shift in the other person. And when this truth becomes undeniable, they stop, not out of anger, but out of clarity. They begin replying to messages more slowly, not to test anyone, but because they no longer have the energy to hold meaningless conversations. They choose silence in discussions that exhaust them, not because they lost, but because they no longer want to win battles that never brought peace. Sometimes you'll see them stare off in the distance while someone is talking, not because they don't care, but because their mind is trying to locate a quiet place within, a place where they don't have to explain, analyze, or carry anyone's emotions anymore. They begin spending more time on the smallest things, making a warm drink, opening a window to take a deep breath, sitting still without touching their phone. These seemingly simple acts are signals that they are relearning how to care for their soul, something they have neglected for far too long. And strangely, their withdrawal confuses people. Some begin to ask, why aren't they as warm as before? Why don't they check in like they used to? Why have they changed? But the empath has not changed. They have simply stopped doing what should never have been their responsibility. This is the phase where the narcissist becomes the most anxious, not because the empath is silent, but because for the first time, they can no longer read the empath. The energy that was once so easy to access is now sealed shut, like a door that no longer opens. They don't know what the empath thinks, feels, or plans to do. And for someone who survives off other people's reactions, this silence is the beginning of panic. The empath is not trying to cause this. They are simply learning to return to themselves, and each step they withdraw pulls another brick out of the narcissist's fortress of pride. If you've read Jung's research at the Burghölzli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich, you'll notice something fascinating. He discovered that the times when a person becomes quiet are not moments of collapse, but moments when the mind begins to reorganize itself in silence. Jung called these moments inner pivot points, when the soul retreats from the world and enters an invisible laboratory, where beliefs, memories, and wounds are dissected, analyzed, and rearranged. That is exactly what happens to an empath entering the cocoon phase. Not isolation, but reconfiguration. From the outside, all you see is silence. But if you could scan them with emotional MRI, the kind Jung said only intuition can detect, you would see an inner lab buzzing with circuitry and glowing signals. Forgotten memories being pulled out for review, old beliefs tested for durability, new boundaries being built experimentally, and self-worth being recalibrated like a system freshly rewired. One of Jung's patients described this phase perfectly. I did not disappear from the world. I simply stepped through a door only I could see, and inside it, everything I had avoided was sitting there waiting for me. Empaths enter the cocoon exactly like that. Not to run from anyone, but to meet themselves again in their rawest form. They remember moments when they smiled when they should have said, I'm hurting. They see clearly the times they guided others through their dark nights, while no one came when their own heart was breaking. They realize how often they saved others only to end up sinking themselves. And in that cocoon lies a truth no one on the outside ever sees. The empath begins asking the question they once feared most. When was the last time someone saved me? The truth freezes them, but that exact moment births the breakthrough. In Jung's case studies, this phase is the threshold of individuation, the moment a person stops living through roles assigned by the world and begins living through the soul's true design. A woman in Jung's research once went 3 weeks without speaking to her husband, not from anger, but because her mind was rebuilding its emotional architecture after 10 years of silent endurance. She told Jung, I didn't leave the world. I left the version of myself the world kept benefiting from. Oh, that is the essence of the cocoon. Not disappearance, but withdrawing energy from roles they no longer agree to play. In this phase, the empath observes everything like a scientist. Who drains them? Who truly listens? Who loves them when they are no longer trying? Who only stays when they serve a need? They don't write this down on paper. They write it on their soul. And this cold, intelligent observation is the first alarm bell for the narcissist. Because when an empath begins to see everything with the clarity of a researcher, they are no longer manipulated by apologies, promises, or emotional games. The narcissist doesn't know this. They think the empath is softening, but in reality, the empath is awakening. The cocoon resets their soul to its original coding, cleaner, brighter, and far harder to control. If the cocoon is where the soul enters the lab to dissect itself, the next stage is the moment a person faces the final conclusion. A version of them must die for the remaining version to live. Jung called this the psychic death, the necessary psychological death that frees a person from old structures that no longer serve them. This death doesn't happen by willpower. No one tells themselves, today I will change. It happens the way the body expels a damaged cell, quietly, biologically, precisely. In one of Jung's recorded sessions, he spoke of a man who embodied the classic empath, always self-blaming, always reconciling, always yielding. One day the man said that although his face and smile looked the same, the person standing behind that smile was no longer there. That is the death Jung described. No funeral, no farewell, just the silent disappearance of an old self. Empaths experience this exact death, not because they stop loving others, but because they stop betraying themselves in the name of love. Not because they stop forgiving, but because they stop forgiving when there is nothing left to save. Not because they become cold, but because they no longer trade their peace for temporary calm. One woman in Jung's study described her moment this way. I realized I was loving out of habit, not out of heart. She said, that day, when her husband yelled over something trivial, she didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't explain. She just felt empty. Not empty from pain, but empty because she no longer believed in the role she had been playing. The death of the old self arrives like that, not through suffering, but through neutrality. Not through loss, but through the realization that what they've been holding on to was already lifeless. What makes this phase so powerful and so terrifying for the narcissist is this. The empath no longer reacts the way they used to. No reaction equal a no supply. No supply equals a narcissist's ego collapses into emptiness. Narcissists live on reactions. They survive through mirrors. They need the empath to return to the old script to maintain their fragile psychological framework. But once the empath experiences psychic death, that will never happen again. You might notice subtle signs others miss. They no longer explain their sadness. They no longer rush to extinguish conflict. They no longer try to understand someone else's pain before their own. They go silent. But it is the silence of finality, not of hurt. Jung once wrote, when a part of you dies, the remaining parts begin to speak the truth. And the truth the empath hears now is one they denied for years. I no longer belong to the version of myself I used to be. How the death of the old self doesn't destroy them. It frees them. It makes them cold where they must be cold and warm where they must be warm. It makes them see relationships not through emotion, but through survival instinct. This is the phase where the narcissist realizes the empath's soul has withdrawn too far to be controlled. They cannot be summoned back. They cannot be provoked into anger. They cannot be pulled into old feelings. This death for the empath is a beginning of freedom. But for the narcissist, it is an irreversible sentence. When the empath's old self has died, rebirth does not arrive with thunder or any dramatic display. It comes the way dawn appears after many long nights, very slowly, very steadily, and without waiting for anyone's approval. They do not return to the world with defiance or pride. They return with a steadiness that makes others wary. Jung calls this moment the emergence of the self, the appearance of the true self, when a person stops living by reflex and begins to live by awareness. What's strange is that this rebirth does not change their appearance or their voice, yet it changes the entire atmosphere they carry. Their eyes are still warm, but no longer invite the wounded to exploit their softness. Their smile is still gentle, but no longer offered to those who only come when they want to be soothed. Their heart still knows how to love, but that love is no longer a river anyone can swim in at will. It becomes a deep, still lake, open only to those who know how to honor its silence. What frightens the narcissist most is not the distance, but the empath's new peace, a kind of peace that cannot be shaken by drama, silent treatment, or psychological games. In modern research on the recovery of highly empathetic individuals, psychologists have noticed something. When an empath is reborn, they no longer respond to negative stimuli the way they used to. Their nervous system is no longer pulled into rescue mode, but shifts into inner protection mode. This is exactly what renders the narcissist's tactics useless. They no longer demand explanations, no longer wait for someone to fix things, no longer beg to be understood. They move past sentences that once shattered them with a calm silence, so confident it forces the listener to question themselves. And because they are no longer easy to read, the narcissist loses 80% of their power. They were used to an empath, soft as water, and now they are faced with someone as structured as stone, not cold, but solid, not aggressive, but unshakable. They were used to a version that forgave unconditionally, but now they meet a soul whose doors only open for sincerity. This is what terrifies the narcissist most. The empath does not return to fuel their emotional vortex. The empath returns to fuel their own life. This rebirth is not revenge, not a change made to prove anything. It is simply their true form after the burden has fallen from their shoulders. And in that moment, the empath steps into what Jung calls the sovereignty of the self, a state of inner autonomy no manipulator can touch. This is not just a coming back, it is a coming home, a return that startles the world, unsettles the shallow, and strips the narcissist of all power. Because in the end, the empath is reborn not to finally be loved properly, but to love themselves in a way they never have before. In the end, what makes this journey unforgettable is not the day the empath disappeared, but the day they returned, not to someone else, but to themselves. That return is not loud. It needs no announcement. It seeks no audience. It unfolds the way the seasons change. You cannot pinpoint the exact moment, but you feel the shift in every breath. When the empath returns, they bring with them a completely different kind of energy. It is not the power of resistance, but the authority of not being shaken. They no longer need to prove anything, no longer need to explain why, no longer need to convince anyone to understand. They simply stand in the exact place their soul has chosen, and their very presence alone is enough to make false relationships fall away. The narcissist sees this return and realizes the truth they fear most. The empath is no longer driven by the need to be loved, accepted, or chosen. They choose themselves, and that choice creates a kind of freedom no one can take away. Jung once wrote, "Man does not find the light by fleeing from the darkness, but by going through it." The empath has done exactly that. They have walked through the deepest, stillest, darkest rooms within themselves, and carried out a light that had never truly gone out. Now, they no longer love from lack, but from fullness. They no longer give to be seen, but give because they know their worth does not lie in anyone else's hands. They no longer try to save those who refuse to save themselves. No longer maintain relationships that exist only because of their endurance. No longer chase souls that keep running away. They walk as if every cell in their body remembers the way home. And it is that very return that makes the narcissist collapse in silence. Because a narcissist never loses power when the empath is suffering. They lose power when the empath no longer hurts, no longer hopes, no longer tries, no longer fears being alone. All that remains is the steadiness of a soul that has gone through an inner death and knows exactly what it deserves. If you are listening to this, it is possible that you too have stepped onto this path. Maybe you are standing at the border between who you used to be and who you are becoming. Maybe you can feel that you no longer live for anyone else, but are beginning to live for yourself for the very first time. So let this be the moment you choose truth, not familiarity. Choose yourself, not the old role. Choose to step out, not to go back. If this video resonates with you, write a simple but powerful sentence in the comments. I have come home. And if you want to continue this awakening journey with souls like your own, subscribe to the channel, not to support me, but so you never have to feel alone on the path every empath must walk. Your silence was once misunderstood. But this return of yours, this time, will be seen, and the world will have to learn how to face a light you no longer hide. There is something very few people say, but every empathic soul knows. The real return does not happen in a single day. It happens in small moments, small choices, small changes that outsiders never notice. It is in those seemingly ordinary details that their new self quietly grows, like a strong sprout breaking through deep soil. You will see they no longer reply immediately to messages that unsettle them, not because they are cold, but because they have learned to respect their own breathing rhythm. You will see they no longer smile when someone makes a joke at the expense of their boundaries, not because they are difficult, but because they know respect is not negotiable. You will see them walking slower, speaking less, yet every word carries weight. Every action carries intention. They no longer live in the unconscious reflex of rescuing, soothing, enduring. They live in a space of choice. And the beautiful thing is, the more whole they become, the fewer expectations they carry. They do not demand anyone understand them. They do not demand anyone change. They do not force anyone to recognize their worth, because they no longer need that to exist. They only need one thing: alignment between who they truly are and the life they are building. That is why those who once exploited their kindness will feel that they've changed. But in truth, they haven't changed. They've simply stopped being easy to distort. A recent study on the recovery behavior of highly sensitive persons revealed an interesting phenomenon. When these individuals re-establish their boundaries after prolonged hurt, they enter a state called calm authority. No raised voice, no threats, no reactivity. Yet their presence makes every manipulative tactic ineffective. The reborn empath is the embodiment of this state. The narcissist, who is used to controlling others through chaos, suddenly finds themselves facing a flat mirror, no trembling, no distortion. And in that mirror, they see their own nature more clearly than ever. The emptiness they've always tried to fill by clinging to someone else's light. This time, that light is no longer available to them. When an empath returns from the darkness, they return with a serenity that no one can buy and no one can steal. They are not looking for a fight. They are not looking for victory. They are looking for truth. And that truth is that they no longer belong to the place that once made them forget who they are. If you're still listening now, your soul may also be standing at that crossroads. On one side is the old self you no longer recognize. On the other is the new self calling your name. And only you can cross that threshold. Let this moment be the marker where you accept that you deserve a version of life you never dared to ask for. A version where your heart is not depleted but nourished. A version where your empathy is not a curse, but a gift given only to the right people. A version where strength does not come from enduring, but from choosing. If you feel energy moving within you as you hear these words, that is not a coincidence. It is your soul reminding you of yourself. Leave a comment saying, "I'm stepping into my own light," and subscribe to the channel so you never have to walk this path alone. Empaths don't need a crowd. They only need the right community souls who are awakening just like you. Because when an empath returns, it is not merely a comeback. It is a beginning.